The concept behind regionalization really is about trying to minimize travel expense. But realistically, if the idea of playoffs is you want your best teams at the end of the season to be able to compete for a national championship, and it seems to me the regionalization model is really past its prime.
College athletics, I think, as a whole, has changed so much here. Last couple years, but there's always that win now mentality. We see it a lot at the Division 1 level, more than Division 2. But how does that balance out at a Division 2 level, where even Division 2 fans are like, it's been 2 years since we've won something. What's going on? But obviously, it takes time to build stuff too, right?
It does, and I'm an old finance guy by training, so that was my academic discipline. And when we talk about finance, we talk about maximizing shareholder wealth, which is a very long-term phenomenon. It's not about maximizing the profits for tomorrow and then you're out of business after that. So we have to recognize that there's a very distinct balance between winning today and winning tomorrow. So sometimes we may not be able to win as much today as we would like because we're having to build for those longer term and sustainable wins tomorrow. So you can't just put it all in today, put all your chips in, and if you go bankrupt, that's it. You really have to make sure that you maintain that balance because fans do like for us to win. We like to win. We're very competitive. And so we have to always watch out for that balance. And sometimes that means taking time to get the right coaches in place, to get the right recruits in place, to get the right facilities in place. Those don't happen overnight. And if all of those things come together the way they should, then we win for the long term and not just in the short run.
And that's a role, Chris, that we try to help facilitate from the conference office. Is that you mentioned so much is changing in intercollegiate athletics. We have to help our schools stay ahead of that curve. So, what can we do from the conference to help with our schools maximizing name, image, likeness opportunities? What can we do from the conference to help our schools have access to rich resources related to student athlete mental wellness? How can we help our coaches recruit better and retain students in an era where there's basically open transfer? So those are things that we take very serious from the conference to try to help our schools play the long game. How to sustain the excellence that we've enjoyed in the MIAA.
And along those lines, there's each MIAA fan base wants every school, their school, to beat the other schools, but you guys all have to work together for kind of maybe the betterment of the conference at the same time. How do you, Dr. Best, work with the other MIAA presidents to figure out, okay, strategically, how do we get the entire MIAA in the best place? Because it probably is like, if one's failing, maybe it's not as good for everybody. If one's not as doing as well as the rest of them, and there's just not a balance there too.
Yeah, and if you look at even the professional sports leagues, what those individuals figured out a long time ago is that if you don't have some degree of competitive balance within the structure, then the league tends to fail. So if you have one team that wins every year, year over year, wins every championship, it tends to be bad for attendance across the board. And so within the MIAA, something that we have a very strong governance structure within the MIAA. And from a president's perspective, we have something called the CEO Council. And the CEO Council has a lot of responsibilities in terms of the policies of the league. But our number one priority and our number one responsibility as the Council of Presidents is to hire the commissioner. And so if you look at the MIAA, we've had a long history of really great commissioners within our conference, and Mike's just the latest iteration of that. And we fully expect, as we're working with each other as presidents, we fully expect that we hire a great commissioner who then is responsible for looking out across the landscape of intercollegiate athletics, being connected into the NCAA, and determining what those current issues are that we're facing, what are the emerging issues that we should be considering. And so then as presidents, we meet formally twice per year. And that is NCAA convention time, which is usually around January. And then we also meet in the summer, which is usually around June. We also have some ad hoc meetings that may happen in between those two meetings. Usually those are virtual meetings. The others are in person. It's in those meetings that we take the information we're receiving from the commissioner. We take the information that we receive from our own athletic directors, our own personal observations, and we kind of combine all that together into what is it we should be working on then as a conference? Where should our conference be positioned? What are some of the priorities that we should be engaged in? And so you heard Commissioner Racy mention some of those that we've already been engaged in the years past, and even in the current year. We are hyper focused on the mental well-being of our student athletes. That's an emerging issue that we saw across all of our student body, but particularly within intercollegiate athletics over the last few years. And so we've had some very distinct initiatives related to student well-being, particularly mental well-being in the last year to 2 years, led by our commissioner and helping us create those resources. But then you throw in some other things that we've been thinking about and working on as presidents and as a conference, name, image, and likeness, right? That is very critical for all of us. And then when we think about the impact of that and how that changes the nature of how we fund athletics, I know in Division I, they're not only thinking about NIL, but they're talking about revenue sharing and all sorts of interesting topics like that we often presume are Division I type topics, but really have a direct impact on us as well. So we meet in these annual meetings at the convention, and our annual meeting that's our CEO council meeting in June. We have meetings in between. The presidents tend to get together individually when we see each other, and usually topic of conversations, what's going on with athletics, what's going on with the conference. And then we basically prioritize what we need to be working on from there. Of course, something that the Commissioner Racy didn't mention that I think I should mention that we're hyper focused on right now in the MIAA is the concept of football. What's happening with football? What are we going to do with football? And frankly, that is being driven to some extent by what's happening with football at the Division I level. But realistically, we have some systemic issues that we face within Division II as it relates to football. We have 28 of the more than 160 teams that play Division II football will qualify for postseason appearance, particularly the playoffs part for championship. That's one of the lowest percentages of all the different sports that we're allowed to sponsor in NCAA Division II. So we have a lot of concern about the ability for our teams to qualify for postseason, particularly playoff or championship, as it relates to other sports within Division II. So 28 of the 160 plus teams getting a postseason appearance is a pretty small number in our opinion when we're talking about less than 20%. And if you think about how that gets complicated even more, in Division II, we use a concept called regionalization. And so in football in particular, the country is divided into 4 different geographic regions. And so only 7 teams from each of those regions will make the playoffs. And in concept, that sounds okay until you start looking at the construct of where the football powerhouses are in Division II. And most of them are concentrated in the central region where we are. And so if you think about only 7 teams from our region making the playoffs, we know that every year, high quality programs that could potentially win a national championship are left out of the playoffs. And that is troubling for us because for us, access to championships is one of the hallmarks of Division II. And we tell any number of great teams every year, particularly in football, that you're not going to have access because we have this unique geographic model. And so whether it's doing away with regionalization, whether it's expansion of the number of teams in the playoffs from 28 to 32 or more, those are issues that we're very focused on in MIAA and would like to see get resolved within the NCAA.
You brought up the football one. I think it's a major one everybody focuses on, especially now that the conference has that non-conference opportunity now. They're week 0 too. And at this stage in the season, I mean, going into the last week, we're taping this before the last regular season game, but there's 4, you can maybe argue 5 teams in MIAA that could have a say of, we deserve to be in here, but we all know you have 2 or 3 losses, you're done, regardless of the year. in your opinion, is there what how do you go about changing that? Because is it adding more to the region? Do you get rid of the regionalization? Because I mean that's a lot of an undertaking, but that's still a lot of questions for it.
Yeah, the concept behind regionalization really is about trying to minimize travel expense. But realistically, if the idea of playoffs is you want your best teams at the end of the season to be able to compete for a national championship, and it seems to me the regionalization model is really past its prime. And even within regionalization, we see some quirky things that happen where what happened in soccer last year, where two MIAA teams who are not very far apart from each other geographically are shipped out to a different state altogether to play a match because of that's where it was scheduled to happen. So we're really talking about saving on travel expenses. We do that at the expense of allowing for the better teams to be in the playoffs in most cases. So heavy lift, maybe, but it really is more so about the willingness of the institutions to bear the cost if necessary for doing away with a model that limits participation in a very negative way from our perspective. You mentioned the regional rankings, for example, determine whether you make the playoffs or not, and mentioned the MIAA teams that may get left out. So our regional rankings are out, and we see that Ferris State is ranked number 1 in the region, a team that was beat by Pitt State to start the season, and convincingly, realistically. But then Pitt State goes into the MIAA and gets beat by 2 MIAA teams that are, again, good teams. One of those was UCM. One of those Emporia. And so within the conference, our teams are so good that we tend to beat up on each other, and it reduces our regional rank. When in fact, this year we've seen being able to go across region, the MIAA has done well with our out of region or out of conference games in the region. And so the regionalization really, I think, hurts the MIAA in particular because we have strong football programs where we kind of beat up on each other within the conference season, and it negatively impacts our ability to make the playoffs.
Chris, I would add that one of the things since I've been commissioner, Dr. Best talked about parity. Gosh, we've had great parity in football in the MIAA since I became commissioner, and it speaks to this issue that Dr. Best highlighted, that we've got Pitt State taking it to Ferris State, and then gets 2 losses in the conference, but since I've been commissioner 8 years, 9 of our 10 MIAA football programs have advanced to the Division II playoffs or won a Division II bowl game. And the bowl game opportunity was a nice consolation for a very successful football program for the MIAA and other conferences, and those have started to go away. And when I started as commissioner, there were 4 bowl games in Missouri, Arkansas, and Texas that wanted MIAA schools to come and play, and we're now down to 1. And it's another complicating factor to schools that invest a lot of money, a lot of resources into a sport that gives back a lot, that gives to the campus, it gives to the community, provides a great platform to showcase and highlight the university. But it's getting harder and harder to justify some of those investments when there's not an appropriate reward on the back end of a very good season in the MIAA.
And with that, for both of you on that, is obviously the cost of travel is always going to be there, but does the exposure and the marketing side of playing for these national championships, playing in these big games, maybe even out that loss? Or because there's no way to maybe measure that completely as both things sitting there, but can that counteract the loss from travel expenses just based on marketing and the exposure you get from playing at the high level?
Yeah, we see athletics as one of our investments, right? So there's a reason why we offer intercollegiate athletics, football being a big piece of that for us. And so it is one of those investments, and the more exposure that we can get with that, the better we see our branding opportunities, our recruitment opportunities. And I would add just this regionalization idea to kind of finish that thought out. to try to prove the point, since it's easy to say these kinds of things, but if you look at the second and third rounds of the playoffs the last few years, certainly even the last 10 years, the second and third rounds are the ones that tend to be the most competitive in Division II. And then when we get to the semifinals and the championship game, those tend to be the ones that are a little less competitive when we see the effect of regionalization realistically. And those are the games that are typically highlighted on a national scale, particularly the championship game. And so really in making that argument, we're not just asking for more access to competition. We're also asking that our most competitive games be the ones that are highlighted on the national level so that we can increase our fan base. And certainly for those institutions that get to compete within the championship game, that's great for that exposure, that recruitment. Even making the playoffs really makes a big difference in our ability to recruit and increase that excitement for attending, in our case, the University of Central Missouri. So very important to us. But if you look at the location of institutions such as UCM and most of our institutions in the MIAA, football in particular, for those of us who sponsor football as one of our sports, that is by far the largest attended event on our campus in any given semester. So for UCM, we'll average well over 7,000 fans per game this year. We have 5 games at home. So we're talking about 40,000 or so fans that come to Warrensburg, Missouri to be a part of this event. That's a huge amount of exposure for us as a campus, but also a huge economic driver for our local communities. So we're really talking about something that's important from a tradition, important from an exposure, from a recruiting perspective, but also even important from an economics perspective as it relates to our local communities.
Chris, can I add something on the branding front too? Because this is an area of frustration for me that we're not doing enough in Division II to help market, promote, and brand the great schools and the excellent programs that we have. It's a critical time in how NCAA is changing, and we need to be thinking about opportunities we have as a division to showcase what schools can truly achieve in a balanced student athlete experience. And that's excelling in the community, the classroom, but especially at the competitive level. And we need to be showcasing that to schools that are in Division I, struggling to sustain that financial model. They need to see a way out. And I don't think we're doing enough in the way that we organize championships, select the teams that are going to be part of those championships, promote those events, talk about our division, to be reaching across and showcasing that to Division I schools that actually would make very good Division II members.
That kind of leads into the next topic I wanted to get to was Dr. Best. When you look at the NCAA as a whole, which is again changing drastically at the Division I level, what concerns are there out there about the current state of what the NCAA is, but also how it is impacting Division II? Like Commissioner Racy said, there's some Division I schools that probably should be Division II, but nobody knows where Division I's heading right now either.
Yeah, and I think you said it well by the way you framed that question, because there's so much time and attention being paid to Division I right now. But even that, it's only the top 50 to 100 in Division I, whatever that means. Now, most of that attention tends to spill over to football. And so whether we talk about the Power Four conferences or whatever that construct is, we're really talking about a very small subset, maybe 10% of the membership of the NCAA. And the real question then becomes, what about the other 900 plus of us who aren't part of that top whatever we're talking about? And how do we manage what it is we're trying to do and still make sure we're competitive within intercollegiate athletics? We have access to championships, but in a way that isn't just universities being affiliated with semi-professional sports teams, right? That's kind of the model that we see happening in Division I now, with revenue share and all sorts of payment structures happening. That's not going to be our model at the University of Central Missouri. So how do you maintain a structure where fans have access to intercollegiate athletics that are highly competitive, highly entertaining, truthfully, but do so in a way that doesn't mean we flip the model where the purpose for us being here is sports, and then there's some academic stuff behind that that we do as part of a side business. And we know that, and the NCAA even advertises that most student athletes will become professionals in something other than their sport. So we know that's true for us. And so how are we preparing the students who come to us to be ready for what comes next in their lives? And this notion that they should bounce around and be at 4 or 5 different institutions over the course of their playing career and not end up with a degree, that's very troubling to most of us in higher education. And so how can we have a model that makes a lot of sense from a fan interest perspective, makes sense from a history and tradition rich environment of a university, but does so in a way that supports the student athlete? And so my fear is at the NCAA level, we spend way too much time talking about that top 10% or so, however that's measured as it relates to intercollegiate athletics, and we do so at the sacrifice of the rest of us. And so, as the commissioner was saying, we really had to start thinking more broadly. We were talking about football playoffs in Division II. Well, that's really at the margin, right? Should we have 32 teams in the playoffs, 36, 28? Should we have regionalization or not? Those are really marginal conversations. The real conversation is what happens next, right? What kind of model do we have where what we would call less successful Division I institutions when it comes to generating millions of dollars of revenue, but have competitive programs for, athletically and academically? How do we combine all of us in some model that makes sense where there's successful competition, there's successful athletics, successful academics, and we do so in a way that makes sense both financially for the institutions, but also generates that fan interest that we all have come to love and respect?
Yeah, those are all great points. Chris, I couldn't have said them better. I've been stumbling to find those words during our previous 20 podcasts. So I'm glad that we had Dr. Best on today. But, it really, I think what he's describing is calling for the NCAA's not moving in a way that's going to address these structural issues. So it's almost calling out for an entity like the Knight Commission or someone like the Knight Commission to get involved and take a look at how do you preserve the educational model for intercollegiate athletics, and what does that structure need to look like? We've talked before, Chris, that the 3-division model created in the early 1970s, it served the NCAA well for 40 years. Now we're at year 50, and the NCAA has twice as many members as it did when it created that model. We need to think about something different. I don't have that answer, but I know that we can't continue to try to fit all of the solutions into the same structure we've been operating with for 50 years. It's time to think about something different.
And Dr. Best, you mentioned keeping the fan engagement and keeping the alum engaged too, but also the student athlete part of it, where you see a lot of high schoolers now. I shouldn't say a lot. You see some high schoolers now. It's a Division I or bust. So how does Division II go about trying to keep selling the fact that there is a lot to offer Division II? I've covering Missouri Western Northwest up here. You had coaches like Ben McCollum say, those fringe Division I guys were able to sell them on Division II, that it's a place you can succeed and be good at. How does the MIAA continue to sell that as, hey, we may not be Division I by name, but we've got premier athletic, teams, coaches, athletes here, and continue to market that part of the MIAA too?
Yeah, we do it exactly by what you were just saying, frankly. So we know that our competition is at the top level, and we know that students, at least my observation is, our students, when they come to us and are on athletic teams here, they love to compete. And so, yeah, maybe there's some appeal of being at the number 1 Division I institution in whatever sport. But frankly, these students are here because they just want to continue to be able to carry on their athletic competition. And they want to be able to be molded by coaches who know what they're doing, molded by coaches who are going to be engaged with them very directly. And on top of that, be able to have a great student experience. So their entire focus won't be just athletics. They will meet people across the spectrum that are not in athletics. And so we sell the Division II model by saying exactly those things you said. You're going to be involved in some amazing competition against some high quality athletes from other institutions. You're going to be able to travel to some very interesting places to do that. And you're going to have a chance to compete for championships, not just local, but national championships. But on top of all that, which is what you could get at a Division I institution, on top of all of that, you're going to get a lot of personal engagement with your coaching staff, your head coach, as well as all of these academics who are here to help facilitate your overall success, not just your success on the court or in the environment in which you compete. So that's exactly how we sell it.
Chris, I would add that student athlete that wants to go to the University of Kansas, he or she's not going to see their chancellor sitting in the stands watching their games. At the University of Central Missouri, you will see the president at almost every athletics event. And, that's really the difference, I think, is the type of environment that you can compete in Division II, where people more than just your coach and your teammates will care about you. Division I think the environment is very much isolation, that you're isolated in everything you do, where your identity is as an athlete. And I think the environment and the mission in Division II is about full integration, and your identity as a student, and what will it take during your 4 or 5 years on this campus to help prepare you for success after graduation. And I think more and more students are becoming aware that that's the type of environment that they want to compete in.
President Best, thank you for the time today. Any final thoughts on anything we've talked about today, or do you want to go back and correct what you said about my Commissioner Racy's first pitch? Because I'm still trying to figure out how that was. I can't say I would do any better. So
well, okay. So I have to confess, I was all the way down the third base line. I didn't have a great angle, but
okay.
I will point out what is the obvious. It always helps to have a great catcher, and so
Yes.
that makes all the difference.
Yeah, I think the key, Chris, is that a lot of people have told me that it sounded better than it looked, whatever that means. So
now, don't get me wrong. My pitch is probably not doing any better. It's probably worse than that at this point. But it's the fact that there's a video of this one that we can keep coming back to it, that everybody was so kind enough to take video of it to make sure it lasts forever. But Twitch Racy one more time. MIAA night at Kauffman Stadium will be April 26.
It's a Saturday, a little earlier in the schedule this year. Last year we had a pretty hot afternoon. I think it was in July, and yeah, this year a Saturday night. I think it's a 6:00 game. The Royals against the Houston Astros, and it'll be a great game. And we want to pack the place with folks in MIAA hats.
President Best, Commissioner Mike Racy, thank you for the time today. It's been a pleasure. And until next time, this is the A Game Show podcast.